Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. You'll never guess who's back. I'm so excited. World famous chef, world famous cookbook author, world famous children's author, Crescent Dragonwagon.
Here I am.
Here you are, and I'm not going to even ask the question. Everybody wants to know about your name, Crescent Dragonwagon. They can go to your website.
They can go to cornbreadgospels.com. There's a little magic button that says, is that your real name?
And then you get the explanation.
They get the whole thing.
It's a lengthy story.
Well, if we tell the truth, it's a lengthy story.
Well,
if you tell the half-truth, which is, it's a children's book name like Dr. Seuss. That's my way that I have managed to sum it up. It's true, but it's not the whole truth.
I alternate between calling you Crescent and Dragon, and so which do you prefer?
You know, an awful lot of my friends that are close to me call me Dragon.
Dragon's great.
Some people call me CD, some, you know.
It works great. Well,
I answer to any of them.
We mentioned you write award-winning children's books, and you've done many of those, but you're also known for your award-winning cookbooks, and that's what we're going to focus on today. And many of us are familiar with Soup and Bread, which is a very successful book, and then you follow that with A Passionate Vegetarian, and you made a confession in The Passionate Vegetarian that for years you kept that in the closet, and people didn't know that you were. Why the secrecy?
Well, you know, no one expects, many people love Italian food or Thai food, and they understand that you don't have to be Thai to love Thai food. You don't have to be Italian. But vegetarian, they add the ism to it. So no one says, if you say, I love Italian food, no one says, so do you how long have you been an Italian? Or do you believe in Italianism? And so there's a little narrow envelope that people put it into, which is, you know, food faddist, denial, you know, I could never do that. And it's like, you know, nobody has to do anything. There's just excellent food that is missing one ingredient and has 1,000 others, has a cornucopia of stuff in it. So, you know, I like to bring, if I'd had my choice, I wouldn't have had vegetarian in the cover even, just because I wanted to bring all the emphasis on food, not on perceived belief system. And, you know, I'd rather just pull out one of my lasagnas with pumpkin and greens and ricotta cheese, or the broccoli enchiladas that I make with, and they have tofu in it, and I know a lot of people, the T word, but they're you know, people flip for those.
Well, and speaking of tofu, is it true that Julia Child wanted your recipe for barbecued tofu?
It is, and Julia Child was a woman of insatiable and untamed curiosity, and she was something that I aspire to, not in terms of famous cookbookness, but every person she met was the same to her. It didn't matter if you were a star, or the guy putting gas in the car, or, you know, somebody, and she was just interested in life. And I met her late in life through a culinary association, and she would go into, we were on a tour together of kosher Philadelphia. And she also took my fearless writing class once, and in the beginning often I asked people, if you leave this room with one thing, what would it be? And she said, I'd like to write with more humor. And isn't that funny? Because we all know she was hilarious on television, but her books, they're terrific, you know, excellent technically, and they're even a little funny, but they don't have the verve and liveliness in terms of humorousness that her television performances did. But there she was, you know, 80-something, and still learning, still going to classes, still...
And eating barbecued tofu.
Oh, and then at lunch we were sitting together, and we wound up telling her this ridiculous story involving Eureka Springs and barbecued tofu, and being voraciously curious. She said, how do you make it? And so we told her, oh, you marinate it in this, and then how long? And she just, you know, she was curious, and that curiosity got focused on food as a way of understanding the world. And
well, some great cooks are notorious for withholding secret ingredients. Are there any recipes that are yours and yours alone? Say with the barbecue tofu, did you
hold that I wouldn't share with
yeah.
somebody? Absolutely not. My mother used to refer to recipes like that as mother-in-law recipes, where you know the son says, you know, you gotta make Mama's cornbread, pecan pie, butter cookies, kreplach, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so Mom writes it out, but she leaves out one ingredient. So son will forever be saying, you know, honey, this is delicious, but it's not as good as Mama's. And no, I'm not that way. And, you know, I think the basic contract of being a human being on Earth is that you eat and you are eaten. You know, it's just like when you pull away all the fancy stuff, and it's the way we're... another thing I've taken to saying is nobody ever eats alone. You might eat by yourself, but you're eating food that was grown from the earth, that somebody selected the seed of, that somebody planted and raised and harvested. Maybe they canned it. Maybe it's even a fast food thing. Mm-hmm. Somebody did it at every step of the way, and it came from some tradition. And if you are by your plate, if one is inclined to say blessings or think blessings, you know, you look at the rice and you can trace its roots back to China and Japan. And there you have so much company when you eat, even if you are by yourself. You're never alone. It's the way that we're, you know, ecology is the way everything interacts with everything else. And if you want to understand environmentalism, you can start with your own plate. In fact, if you want to understand history, culture, family, it's just a great way in. And, you know, you mentioned that I write kids' books as well.
Right.
And I do, and I love doing it. But the fact is, only a teeny percentage of parents, alas, read to their children. But everybody eats. That's not why I write cookbooks.
No,
it's just a way... It's a way in to understanding life that anyone can, that's open to anyone.
Well, you say it so beautifully in an intro to Passionate Vegetarian. You make the comment that preparing food and eating is the way that we weave days into lives.
Yes. Yep.
And I don't think you can say it any better than that. And certainly your food has been featured at a lot of high-profile occasions. like you ended up preparing the inaugural breakfast when Bill Clinton was elected the first time.
We did brunch for 1,200 at Bill's first inaugural.
It had to be intimidating.
What can I say about fear? My friend Crow Johnson says, I've found my center and it's over the edge. You know, there's really some, in fact, when Bill was running and I would listen to all these people say, inexperienced governor of small state, like talking parrots, not to diss parrots, but
no.
Inexperienced governor. And it's like, the only way you get experience is by experiencing, you know, and so if you just stick to what you know, then none of us would ever have learned to walk or do the alphabet or fallen in love or done the actions that one does to create children. You have to overcome your fear and intimidation of doing the new.
Sure.
You have to kind of make peace with your own anxiety and, you know, say, well, there you are. Hello, sit down at the table, but we're going on, you know.
Practically speaking, how do you prepare for that? You told me last night that you weren't ushered into the White House.
No. It was part of the inaugural events, and I guess relatively few people have been at an inauguration, but Washington stops for a week, and there is a series of celebrations that are unbelievable. Now, we sort of blundered into doing it the right way. Ours was the Sunday brunch before the Wednesday inauguration. We didn't know that by Wednesday everyone is tired and they've been to parties and their feet hurt, and we didn't know any of that stuff. We just thought, you know, it was when my soup and bread book had come out, And we just thought, Sunday morning brunch, and we got a beautiful historic home. My late husband was then alive, and he was an historic preservationist.
Right.
It's called Decatur House, and as Ned kept saying, Decaturing House, 2 blocks from Dwight House. and my publisher paid for part of the costs, and so what we did was there was food for 1,200 people, and the publisher had a third of the tickets, and we had a third of the tickets, and a third we gave to the Democratic Party, and in turn the Democratic Party was just very excited about it. So little did we know that's when people are first coming in.
Oh.
And they're really excited, they're really happy to be there. It was very springy weather for being January, January 13th, I think it was. And it was the event. And we had a ball, and everybody that was there had a ball.
And you didn't have to clean up afterwards, did you?
No. And we worked with, of course, we worked with caterers there. I don't mean that I sat there and prepared every omelet for 1,200 people, but we worked with a wonderful catering company outfit there, and they perfectly did the recipes, which is not easy when you scale it up that much.
Oh, that's what I was going to.
But they did it. And the night before, we were sitting down to eat dinner in a restaurant, and I said, wait a minute. And I called the catering company, and I said, don't make the cornbread, do the dry mix and do the wet, but don't mix it up until right before, because cornbread has to be made fresh. You'll need to keep making it throughout. And he said, oh, it's so good you called. We had the wet and dry, and we were just about to start baking it. But by God, that's what they did. They brought cornbread up in skillets throughout.
Oh,
and it was hot and good, and they were wonderful.
Mentioned the White House kitchen. What's your kitchen like, Crescent? This is your workplace, your office, and I imagine it all neatly organized. Is it like that?
Well, I live in Vermont now, and I live in what was my family's summer home. And my aunt didn't mind that the kitchen was over the part of the house that didn't have a basement, because she was just there in the summers. It was really cold, and the pipes would freeze. And 6 weeks after I bought the house, in December, the pipes froze. The plumbing and heating company came, thawed them out. And while they were using the blowtorch, they didn't know the blowtorch was defective, and there was an explosion.
Wow.
And so I heard screams. The guys were fine. They were not hurt, but they were out of work for 6 weeks. So I had equal to the insurance money a very, very old, funky kitchen to make a new kitchen. So I have a wonderful, sunny kitchen. I moved it to the side of the house. It is over the basement, and it's cheerful. And since I worked in a restaurant kitchen, everything is within reach. I like a small, tight kitchen. But I've got plenty of room where people can stand around and congregate, because everybody ends up in the kitchen anyway. And
that's what food is for you. It's a gathering place. You mentioned cornbread in your latest book, The Cornbread Gospels. You mentioned the website, cornbreadgospels.com, and it has over 200 recipes. Why cornbread? Well, and we've got some here, too.
Yeah, we do have some, and we're going to taste some in a little bit.
Oh, good.
Well, I have been fascinated with cornbread for a long time, and I had sort of 2 roots that started me on it. And one root was back when I had the inn. Of course, I did local, regional food, and there was I used to say cornbread is the planet around, it's the sun around which the planets of the menu revolve. And so I loved doing that, and our guests would, pull open the napkin and cornbread, I love cornbread. Well, we had somebody working for us. It was a native Eurekan, and one day she took me aside and she said, some local people really, they're talking about your cornbread. So I thought that was a good thing, and I said, really, what are they saying? And she said, no, they don't think you should have a white tablecloth restaurant where you serve cornbread. And I said, Becky, but everybody loves our cornbread. You love our cornbread. Why not? And she said, well, cornbread is just, she said, it's poor food. And that was my first window into the fact that corn had an unusual history, that it was associated both with bounty and plenty, but also poverty, that it had a social, that there were class associations to it. So that was one thing that sort of, so the first thing was just that I loved cornbread and that our guests loved cornbread. Then the next big step was kind of going, and kind of taking note and thinking, I want to get back to, I want to figure this out sometime.
Well, yeah, the social implications are interesting. I really hadn't thought of it that way. And as you were talking, I was thinking of the story. I'd heard that you'd actually served cornbread to the queen, princess of Yugoslavia.
I did. She loved it, too.
Oh, she did. How did you happen to just present her with cornbread? Instead of curtsying, you have cornbread.
Let's face it, I have a weird life. You know, I didn't set out to have one.
Yeah.
But there was a nonprofit organization that I had supported, a school for children in India that has a branch here, and I really liked its educational theories. And she came to open the American branch of that school, Princess Elizabeth of Yugoslavia, who happens to be an activist that speaks for removing landmines because children get crippled. And so, you know, this school was in harmony with much of what she stood for. So she gave the opening address, and she was there, and I, as is always my way, I ended up doing the food for that event. And so she had my cornbread, and just like everybody else, you know, I love cornbread. How did you make, and you know, how did you do, I've never, you know, people outside of the South don't know the whole thing about baking in a skillet, and are stunned when they find out how good that is and how interesting that is.
Well, and see, and I'd always thought of cornbread as being a Southern delicacy, but you have a section in here on Northern cornbreads and on global cornbreads.
Yes. Well, you know, first of all, on the title, you notice it's gospel with an S. And I always say that whatever way you grew up eating cornbread, that is like, that's the stone tablet that you came down from the mountain with. That is the gospel truth about how cornbread should be made. Now, everybody's stone tablet is different, but you know the one that, you know the one that's right. It's the one your mama made, or your grandma, or in some cases your grandpa. I had some people in Rhode Island that the grandfather was a designated cornbread maker. But, you know, while people argue about what is real cornbread, real American cornbread, the original, the one and only, is the corn tortilla. That was here first. That is primal cornbread. That is cornmeal made into masa, which we can talk about later, salt and water, 3 ingredients, primal, basic. Then, and the kind that we think of as cornbread is actually relatively recent, because we didn't have baking soda and baking powder until the 1800s.
See, I hadn't thought about that.
And so early cornbreads were either mixed with wheat flour and yeast risen, or they were spoon breads. I've got a chapter in there. And a spoon bread, have you had a spoon bread ever?
No.
Oh, okay. So picture cooked cornmeal, like if you want to get it inexpensively, you would call it grits. If you want to pay $23 a plate for it, you'd call it polenta. And
well, I've had grits. So.
And, well, okay, you've got your cooked grits. You fold in egg yolks and maybe cheese if you want. You beat egg whites stiff and fold them in. So you have, in effect, it's almost like a souffled cornbread. And that was what they were eating at the plantation houses in the South. Amazingly delicate food, while the slaves were eating cornmeal mush or hoe cakes, which are, or ash cakes. Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, writes about ash cakes, which when the slaves were out in the fields in the South, and at noon they would mix cornmeal and water, and they'd build a fire, and then when it burned down to the ashes, they would they'd wrap the corn cake in leaves and bake it right in the ashes, and then pull off the leaves would burn away, so there was ash on the surface. And sometimes they would bake it on the flat blade of a hoe. That was a hoe cake, and that was less ashy. So you had this, there you have the beginning of the two-rooted history of cornbread that the people in the big house were eating it as a delicate souffle. The people in the fields were eating it covered with ashes, just, not an egg in sight.
Well, and you're so broad-minded and inclusive. You even have recipes for the birds in here. Now, explain this, and then set up. We're going to see a little video here that's very important.
All right. Well, mostly I've discovered history and family and deep, interesting, fascinating questions in it about history and society and people. But every so often you came upon something just downright weird. And one of the downright weird things that I came upon was that pet birds like parrots and macaws and cockatoos and cockatiels are evidently, I say evidently because I don't own one myself, they're very picky eaters. And they will not eat their bird pellets, and they will not eat their vegetables, and they will not eat their bird vitamins. But somewhere along the line, cornbread lovers and bird lovers discovered that you can take pretty much anything, put it into a cornbread batter, and the parrots will scarf it up. Well, all of my recipes, always, I test them. And if you had lived in Eureka Springs instead of Tulsa, you would have been on my list of people that were called.
So you've tested all 200 of these?
Oh, not only have I always have a group of people over for testing, recipe testings. I've fed half of Eureka Springs and a quarter of Vermont. Anyway.
Gotcha.
So they come over and they give their opinion. So I could not put in a recipe for the birds without testing it. So there came the posters in pet shops and feed stores all over southeastern Vermont saying, your parrot could be a YouTube star. And so we went out, since the parrots were not going to be brought to us in a Vermont winter, we went out to different people's homes and we were testing our cornbreads on them. And my boyfriend is a filmmaker, so he said, I got to film this. So we got all this amazing footage of cornbread, these amazing creatures eating the cornbread. And then we cut it and edited it, and I wound up rewriting the words to the old song, the Darktown Strutter's Ball, as the Cornbread Flutter's Ball, and so we have this celebration of parrots eating cornbread.
And we're going to show that now.
Okay.
I'll be over to get you on a four-wheel, honey. Pick you up about 8:30. No, don't be late. We're gonna be there when that cornbread comes out. Don't you know when we eat it, honey? It's 2 hops forward, peck it down. Joyful to the beak. Heck, we might even speak tomorrow night at the Cornbread Flutter's Ball. Well, we ate that cornbread shell and carrot, guaranteed to please a parrot. Oh no, it's all gone, we gotta get that girl to bake again. Don't you know when we eat it, honey, it's peck it down, flap those wings, to cornbread we relate. Hey, what's this empty plate? Make tonight another cornbread flutters, make tonight another cornbread flutters, make tonight another cornbread flutters ball.
Okay, Crescent, what's the deal with the whole egg?
David, my boyfriend, filmmaker, kept saying, hold it up higher so people can really see the egg dropping in. That's the main difference between macaw muffins for macaws and macaw muffins for people, is a whole egg, because those birds need the calcium to make their own shells when they have baby eggs, and they also need the grit. If you think about a chicken scratching in the yard, they eat a few pebbles and they eat You know, they like that grittiness in their diet as well. I suppose it's the avian equivalent of fiber in the diet.
Well, and I've been sitting here the whole show smelling this wonderful cornbread, and I want samples of it, but I realize that these are here to illustrate what we were talking about earlier, the different kinds of cornbread, the regional cornbreads.
Well, America is a cornbread nation, and as I said, we don't have a corn tortilla here, which is the primal cornbread, but we do have, here is your classic southern cornbread, and it's shaped pie-shaped wedge, because of course it was baked in a skillet. This actually is, you'll like the literary connection on this. This is the cornbread that Truman Capote's family grew up eating.
Okay, and we just have about a minute here, so we want to get...
Very straight, not sweet, essence of corn, stripped down, basic. Then over here, we have a Yankee cornbread, which is sweetened with maple syrup. One huge difference between South and North.
Is this Vermont maple syrup?
You betcha.
Okay, good.
I live among the syrupers. And Mark Twain said, if God had meant cornbread to have sugar in it, he'd have called it cake. So one of the big dividing divisions is sweet versus non-sweet. This is a southwestern one. My friend Choo Choo, who lives in Eureka Springs, this is Choo Choo's original Dallas hot stuffed cornbread. And
how hot is it?
It's spicy.
That's good.
That's one people, if you like spicy food, you will go to town on this one. It has cheese on top.
Oh, it's delicious.
It's got onions in it.
Well, they're all good.
Oh, they are.
Cornbread for all occasions, for all parts of the country, the Cornbread Gospels. Thank you so much for being here, Crescent.
It is totally my pleasure.
And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.